the problems with economics that we have is we have no control. That's part of what we have to rethink. In rethinking the state and redesigning the democratic institutions that we all agree are what best serves the interests of the people.
Yes, I wouldn't want to give people the idea that we're talking about a centralized control room for the whole country, telling everybody what to do. That's what the Russians try to do with their experiments with large computer systems and their centralized planning that went into the constitution in Russia and in Cuba and in Mexico. We borrow that structure, and you can see the results. What I guess you and I are talking about is that we need a to create a system where all these ideas get applied recursively at different levels of complexity in a way that people solve as many of their own problems as they can, and then you start piling up systems only insofar as the remainder of the control necessity appears. And if we do that, we would be maximizing liberty. We would be, I think, this would be the only way to maximize liberty because one single centralized system cannot know everything uh, at the same time. And even if it did, who would be there to interpret that and then know what to do? Um, Maybe in um, modern sci-fi movies, we get systems which are so large and so complex that they can deal with exabytes, you know, like millions of terabytes at the same time. We still don't have that. Maybe someday we will have something which is very um, capable of analyzing a lot of information at the same time. But as for now, we could do much better that we're doing if we only sat down to redesign the government system according to our new capabilities.
Javier, when we talk about control, uh, we're talking about a huge subject with many issues that are complex and that we need to consider. I agree with you. It's not as simple as thinking that we're going to set up a centralized control, excuse me, a centralized control unit that is going to govern everything that happens in the economy throughout the country or the world for that matter. Or the same thing applies to the legal system and to all other societal systems. Uh, but again, for me, the secret is to talk about these issues, talk about control, think about it in terms of what we have available today. And I keep on coming back because it's a central issue of what I think about. We have the technology and information and communications technology, which permits people such as you and I right now to communicate with each other and exchange ideas and work effectively to the extent that we are effective as a team. It's all because of information technology. So when we talk about control and we talk about things like economy, etc., there's a lot of thinking to be done. At this stage, I have lots of questions and very few answers, but I have an idea that I have learned from what science has taught us and my understanding of systemic function that says, the economy has to be built in such a way that it maximizes the freedom of the individual and the liberty of the individual and the effectiveness of the production and distribution of goods and services. Uh, I have my own idea about what kind of economies make sense. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is that really, when we're talking about economic activity, we're talking about a system that takes input and converts it into output. That's, in a general way, that's what economics is all about. You take the input, if you're making automobiles, or maybe steel and rubber and wiring and all the rest of it, process it, and out comes out an automobile. Now, uh, for me, the most effective manner of turning input into output is through a monopoly. Now, people say, monopoly? Are you kidding? You really want to have a monopolistic economic production? And they say, yes, yes, absolutely. It is the most effective and the most efficient way of converting input into output. For example, and give me a bit of time to spend. Suppose I was setting up an economic system for the planet. And I said, well, we need automobiles. Why do we need 40 or 50 automobile companies fragmented all over the world, competing, duplicating, creating waste, et cetera, et cetera?
Hmm.
In my way of thinking is I would set up a monopoly. A monopoly that has access to all the relevant information, the way that we have now with technology. I know that in Mexico, X number of automobiles are sold each year. And that X is broken down into many categories that we can determine. And I know that in Japan, it's Y number of automobiles, and so on around the world. If I am the president of a monopoly in the world that has access to all relevant information, I know how many automobiles are required to satisfy the market. I know it down to exact numbers. I know how much I can predict demand because I know what is historically what has happened. I can bring all the uh, research and development teams that exist in 40 or 50 different organizations and put them all under one roof. And instead of competing with each other, they collaborate. The point is that if you think of economies and monopolies in terms of what is possible today because of the information available through information and communication technology, you could set up a manufacturing or distribution system by saying, okay, Mexico needs, let us say, 15,000 vehicles this month. We have a factory here, and we have a factory there. We know exactly what quotas to allow to the factories so that everything, the production is spread throughout the world, but it also means that it's absorbed locally. You don't need these huge ships shipping automobiles from Japan to United States and going back with another load of automobiles from United States to Japan. That's inefficient. Not only that, but as we've learned, it deeply, deeply impacts our environment and our use of resources and energies.
Well,
So,
to that I would respond that we can look at Paul Hawkins' book on world commerce, and we would get all those arguments. It's absolutely ridiculous on why beer has to travel half the world when to get here to when we've had some of the best beer ever from our own local plants. This idea of international commerce and is something that we have to talk about more in detail. Now, going back to your example with the cars, maybe what you say is right because we now have the car as a very established technology. But in the beginning of the industry, the presence of several and later dozens of different manufacturers is what produced a car that is much more efficient right now than it was, let's say, 20 or 30, 40, 50 years ago. So competition, I think, is very good, but maybe after a certain point, when the industry is mature, competition starts uh, losing its meaning. These are things that would have to be addressed in how you are to organize an economic system. I would not, I'm not discarding competition per se as something useful. What I've learned is that competition and cooperation are set up in different layers, where at one layer you have competition, but it's based on another layer that's established cooperation. It's just like a game. You cannot have a soccer game or a football game without competition, but you cannot have it without the rules defining the size of the field where you're playing, or having some rules about what is fair inside the competition and not fair. You have to
I,
take care of the players. You have to take care of their health or their well-being. So we're going to have competition and cooperation oscillating from one point to the other. But what is undoubtedly true is that this implies that we start talking using a very different language than the one we have been using now. And maybe later, at some other point, we should talk about the difference there is in traditional science and cybernetics, the science of systems and the science of government, the science of governance in general. I would have to sort of quit right now,
yeah.
and I don't know. You want to add anything
No,
before we
I just
leave?
wanted to make two very brief points. I agree with what you say about competition and cooperation. I have a word that maintains the two of them and blends them into one, and that's collaboration. You know, collaboration is both competitive and cooperative at one and the same time. But it's a dynamic that keeps the benefits of competition that you speak of, but puts it in a different context.
Okay.
And one other and to me, it's what you're talking about, and the answer is yes. We have to understand collaboration and how it works much better.
Okay.
And the other one is the one point about uh, monopolies that I think is well made. When I've talked to people about monopolistic economic enterprise, they say, but Boris, monopolies have a history of raping the people. And that's one of the reasons we're so anti monopolistic, because they have monopolies. The history of monopolies is that they abuse the people. And I say, well, there's a cure for that, and it's called transparency. If the monopoly was totally transparent in everything that it does, it would not be able to rape the people. So we have a way of dealing with the issues in monopolies that pushes away from the thought.
Well,
And
mhm. That
well,
would imply making a public property of all the patent and law information and the rights to those patents and everything. We would be basically having to share all those discoveries in order to have this absolute transparency. So we're talking about a very, very different world, a very different sort of organization for living better. And maybe you and I don't have the ultimate truth, but what we do
I can tell
have,
you I don't.
maybe we don't, certainly we don't, but at least we start talking about options, because there are so many things that are not working right now that they invite us to try to rethink this.